1966 was the year that Britain's post-war children came of age, and it changed everything.
The look, the culture, the music. There was something about 1966.
It was very easy for people to get into bed together.
It was a revelation. I was entering another planet.
Universities were at the heart of this transformation. In the first half of the decade, 15 new ones were created, 8 in 1966 alone.
We were doing something creative to create a new Britain.
For me, it was the ultimate in social mobility.
They would change this country forever.
There was equality between men and women.
It gave us all an extraordinary foundation.
It was actually the fulcrum of all that change, and that's what made it so exciting.
On the 50th anniversary of 1966, I want to explore that extraordinary year of contrasts. It was an era of technological advancement. Space travel was in its infancy, and people had more cash in their pockets. But at the same time, TV was still black and white, and deliveries could still be unmotorised. In the southeast, 2 new universities, Kent and Sussex, were at the forefront of this revolution in higher education. They promised both men and women from every walk of life all the opportunities a university degree could offer.
So what I want to know is how much did the people who first came to those 2 universities feel that it was an important moment of change?
I'm going to visit both universities to try and find out. Kent admitted its first 500 students in 1965. Sussex had opened 4 years earlier, and I studied law there in the 70s, so please excuse the tie. Young, pioneering academics were tempted away from the more traditional institutions to join them. One of them was Rod Kedwood.
What one remembers about that era is, for all its radicalism, actually still a tiny number of people were going to university.
Yeah.
So do you remember it as being actually very middle class still?
We opened the university to people who had no qualifications. We were the first university to do that, and we admitted a lot of adult students on that basis. So we were intent on breaking down the barriers.
I was the first member of my family to go to university. People, I'm sure, who might not have been naturally thrown together with other people were thrown together. I think it was a very positive thing.
I think there is something special about a 60s campus where people come together in different ways, and these campuses are designed to bring people together in different ways.
I was certainly the only person from Northern Ireland. I did discover eventually some other Scottish person who played his bagpipes after dinner every night and drove everybody spare.
Everything was changing: music, art, fashion, society, and you didn't want to do anything that was old. You didn't want to go to an institution which was decades old, dated from the last century, and you certainly didn't want to go to something that had been around for centuries.
Talk a bit about where the 60s had landed by 1966.
Well, the lovely thing about 66 was there's this feeling that that period of anxiety about World War, about atomic war, nuclear wars, by 66, that was beginning to be in the past. By then, Harold Wilson's notion of a new scientific revolution, really, a new kind of society that we were creating, was beginning to make a real impact on the way Sussex thought about itself. We were doing something creative to create a new Britain.
And this new Britain found a new political direction when Harold Wilson's Labour Party won a landslide victory in March 1966.
This is a massive win for Labour, the biggest single change of seats since their great victory of 1945. And of course, it's a massive personal win for Mr. Wilson.
In the period between 1965 and 67, homosexuality was decriminalised, abortion was legalised, and the Race Relations Act was passed. And Wilson's thrust was on what he called the white heat of technology. So there was serious money to invest in these new universities.
How much did you have a sense that this was the turning point of putting the war behind you?
Well, I think it was almost everybody's parental generation. All their parents had been thoroughly involved in the war. We had a debt of gratitude to pay, and we were very conscious of wanting to build on what they had done. And having a new university, having a new society, having a new concept of what education and science and politics was all about. And that way we could undoubtedly say thank you.
There was a simple but radical shift in the new intake of these universities. For the first time, the ambition was to have an equal number of men and women. Carol was one of the first undergraduates at Sussex.
What was it like being a woman in a new university in 1966?
Well, it was great. And I think I only came to appreciate how great it was as time went on. I think if you walked around the buildings that were here then, you would have seen pretty much gender equality.
How significant was it, as a young woman, that you'd chosen to go to university?
Well, my father was a farmer in Cornwall, and I was the first in my family to go to university. I was hugely excited by that, but also mildly terrified. I came up on the overnight sleeper from Penzance, never done such a thing before. But it was hugely exciting, actually, and it was very different, and it felt very liberating.
That was felt to be the right thing to do, that there was equality between men and women. And just as there was equality between arts and science.
Loved being here, loved being by the sea. Remember the sea in winter. I mean, it was just amazing being down the beach. No, it's just, we were just really lucky to come here, I think.
How optimistic did you feel about the future?
Hugely. You know, there was a notion that you would contribute to a world which was going to work very hard to do away with the ills of the past, and that things would be different.
1966 was clearly a key moment of social and political transformation in Britain. Gender equality was becoming the aspiration of a new generation. But men and women didn't just start to think differently, they started to dress differently too. Twin sisters enrolled at Sussex and became the focus of huge press attention. The fashion-conscious daughters of the new Labour cabinet minister Douglas Jay were emblems of the modern womanhood of the times.
I applied to Sussex University, but they turned me down. Probably because I said the only reason I wanted to go to Sussex because the Jay twins were there.
It's 50 years since their heyday at Sussex. What do Helen and Catherine remember of that time?
I think that was the style, that was the classic shift, you see. And that was so easy to make.
And that neckline, do you remember that?
Yes.
Much of the attention on them was to do with their cutting-edge 60s look.
So these are clothes you actually wore in 1966 at Sussex?
These are my student clothes, short skirts and the sort of mini look.
Actually, let's
and the
look,
boots.
Let's first of all, how short? They were very short.
Extremely short.
Hold it up.
I shall. I don't wear this anymore. Just decent, I would say.
We're about that above the knees. That's about 4 inches.
This is one of the dresses I did wear.
That's a dress.
So
I thought that was a jersey.
No, well, this is what we would have worn every day to university.
Cut out white boots and skirts getting shorter and shorter and, you know, sort of skinny ribbed sweaters.
There were the Londoners who were smart and who wore different clothes every day. And then another lot who didn't worry about that sort of thing. And therefore they didn't stand out so much. But I was always attracted to the ones who were out of my league, really.
We really did take our course extremely seriously and enjoyed the studies and the lectures and the reading. But at the same time, we had such fun with clothes and fashion.
What do you think it was about you then? I mean,
we were just students having fun. I would say by about the second or third term of our first year, the interest in us was becoming a little bit ridiculous. I think that we sort of symbolised this huge change that was happening in this country, musically with the Beatles, And politically, because our father had become a cabinet minister at that time and that Labour hadn't been in government for a long time, it was a big part of their policy to expand higher education for young people, and Sussex symbolised that because we were the first.
The twins graduated in 1966. Were they conscious of being right in the middle of this moment of social change?
Looking back on it, when I look at the changes in our clothes, the changes in sex and contraception, there was just some major social changes going on during that period. When when you're in the middle of something, you're not really aware of it.
In some ways, 66 is the moment before lots of things seem to happen legally, if we think about a lot of those civilising law reforms that we think about, homosexuality, issues around abortion, issues around hanging. Those might have been passed through the statute books, 67 for the Sexual Offences Act, but that debate had been going on for 10 years.
And how aware were you of other social changes? I mean, in 67, so a year after homosexuality was legalised, abortion was legalised, were you aware of this? Were you aware of gay people? I mean, particularly being in Brighton, for instance.
No, well, it's interesting that, because our first landlord was two men in Hove, and they were absolutely a gay couple. I had absolutely no idea what this meant. I mean, we never talked about it. It wasn't something that anyone was concerned about, really, at least not in my background anyway. But no, I mean, that was all starting, but I think very slowly, really, the acknowledgement of homosexuality and, you know, that people felt they could come out and be who they wanted to be.
Law reform and all the other social and political changes that burst into flower in this period were absolutely crucial to shaping the Britain we live in today. And I'm so grateful that as a student at Sussex a decade or so later, I reaped the reward of that. As I walk around Brighton, where I still live, I really enjoy the combination of continuity, like this shop that seems to have been here forever, and the things that signify even more changes to come. The guitarist Mo Foster was a Sussex undergraduate in '66 and was at the centre of the musical scene on campus. He was the first in his family to go to university.
So when you came from little village in the Midlands to cosmopolitan-ish Brighton, do you remember that moment of entry?
Very much. It was a revelation. It was I was entering another planet.
What were the differences?
Well, the miniskirt had just started.
Well, they didn't have them in the Midlands.
No. we had overalls, I think. Our whole world was the campus. It led me to do things I wouldn't have thought of.
Like?
Well, the music.
Mo's band, the Baskervilles, supported many of the big names who played on the campus.
And they were a really good group. Every Sunday from, I think it was 7:30 to 10, we had a free hop. And I was going out with the singer in the group, so I felt, oh, yeah, I'm with the singer.
It's a long list of people who came and played at our dances. Cream, Pink Floyd, Georgie Fame. We were setting up one day and the guitar player had lost his plectrum. And someone said, well, there's a folk singer in that room. Go and see if he can lend us one. So we went and borrowed a plectrum from Paul Simon.
Oh,
and
wow.
I never gave it back.
I bet you didn't.
I can remember the Kinks came, which was a really, a fantastic gig.
He's a dedicated follower of fashion.
There were certain young ladies who benefited from a visit from individual members of the Kinks. And certain members of the Kinks who benefited from a visit to academic young ladies.
What we want to do is let's hear some of you. Now, you finally made this band Affinity.
Yeah.
Look at what a 60s image is that.
Just.
Oh, that's so funny. That's absolutely great. I feel like we're floating on a cloud.
Well, it was a kind of period where sometimes the audience would be sitting on big scatter cushions, that kind of thing, you know, very, very groovy.
Oh, which are you?
That's me, half on my either side.
The Baskervilles were the start of a career as a session musician and producer, working with many of the world's great names, from Eric Clapton and Joan Armatrading to Sting.
And I want to play the Chogs because this is the 1966 record, Wild Thing.
But it wasn't just the mix of students or the vibrant campus social life that was new and exciting. What was being taught was different as well. In vivid contrast to the traditional feel of its home in the cathedral city of Canterbury, the new University of Kent took a distinctly modern approach to teaching. Colin Seymour Ure was one of its first lecturers.
You came here to Kent University when you were in your very early 20s as a lecturer in politics.
Yes, I'm in 24.
What was it that you thought you were doing with the new university? Why was it different?
The great idea which all the new universities thought they were inventing was known as interdisciplinary studies, requiring students to study a range of different disciplines or subjects. And that sounds terribly unoriginal now, but in those days, it was pretty unusual.
That idea that if you do science, maybe you should do a bit of English lit or know a bit of history or do a bit of humanities. The new map of learning, interdisciplinarity, I think that's a really important legacy.
Economics, sociology, politics, anthropology, statistics, a language. It was interesting.
It gave us all an extraordinary foundation. And I think, yes, that was very new.
I love the colourful clothes you wear.
New connections between arts and sciences, more equality between men and women. How did all that translate into the daily life of a student in 1966? Did it enrich their lives, or did it just mean they had more fun?
There was something about 1966. It was a conjoining of the look, the culture, the music, the feel, the philosophy. There was something in the air that things were becoming more liberal.
Judy was 19 when she arrived at Kent in 1965.
This is great too. People like Judy Graham.
Second-year humanities and one of the ravers of Rutherford.
I was.
She'd already worked for a year in swinging London.
So when you were there in your miniskirt and your boots and so on and so forth, were you bringing a bit of London to Canterbury?
I was absolutely bringing London to Canterbury. You know, we used to go to Carnaby Street. It was the fashion, it was the beauty, swinging London, and it really was like that.
They seemed extraordinarily confident. A lot of them very beautiful. A lot of them, I think, knew they were rather beautiful. So, yeah, they were terrifying.
It was the year the pill started to be used. There's this big hoo-ha about girls announcing that they'd got their pill and, you know, that kind of thing.
I was almost, in the beginning, slightly shocked at the amorality of the place.
There was a lot of serial dating. I mean, everybody knew who you got off with, because it was a goldfish bowl. You know, they designed the beds to be too narrow. They wanted to put the students off having sex by having very narrow beds, but of course, that wasn't going to work, was it?
Kent was the first university which actually had men and women living in the same building together. So obviously they had to have rules. And we had to learn what those rules meant. I mean, it was the first time, for example, that many of us had come across the word fornication.
Eliot College was the very first college, and they had a curfew after 10 o'clock, and boys and girls were not allowed to be in the same corridor. I think they quickly realised that wasn't going to work.
It was very easy for people to get into bed together. I mean, you know, obviously it wasn't allowed, and the porters were supposed to come round and sort of check up on people, which they did with only a certain amount of success. And in fact, a couple conceived a baby in the very first year.
And have you ever looked back on your time at Kent and regretted that you didn't go to Oxford?
The wonderful thing about going to Kent was that because there were so few of us, you were forced to be a pioneer. Stand out from the crowd. You could either sit in the bar and drink coffee or beer and do nothing, or get up and make things happen. And there were quite a few of us who just did that.
Looking at the really old buildings here in Canterbury, you get a real sense of the twin track of change in the 60s. You've got this brand new university growing in this ancient capital of Anglicanism. This real sense of the conservatism of the time that was, and this undercurrent of change that's bubbling up.
And as they hopped in and out of bed with each other, or stood on the sidelines, terrified by this new breed of woman, I want to see where they slept. So I'm going back to where Mo Foster lived in Brighton.
So what does it feel like?
I feel old.
It is quite peculiar, actually, and of course it's so transformed.
It's unrecognisable.
Like most students at Sussex, Mo spent some of his time living in town with his friends at a guest house, now a typically retro Brighton B&B.
So presumably it wasn't like this when you were here?
Absolutely not. It was very grey-looking, very drab, and partitioned. There was like a warren of bedrooms here. It was always cold because electricity was by a metre on the wall. You had to feed in shillings, and of course it ran out often. And two guys who were in this room got around that by running the electricity from the light socket illegally and dangerously.
For the seaside B&B owners, it was a chance to earn money, even in the quiet winter months.
Who were the landladies, or whatever they were?
It was a husband and wife who did their job, but it was an us and them relationship.
Did they police your visitors and your guests?
Well, we were so naive and innocent that we didn't have guests or visitors. No one tried, really. It was
Our landlady was quite a character. She had a parrot on her shoulder that used to kiss her in the most revolting way. She had a husband with one leg. She put plastic sheeting on the stairs so we wouldn't mess up the carpet. She was a cow. I mean, she just ruled the roost. We couldn't do anything.
What would this have been like as a room when you were in 1966?
Drab. There had been two single beds, a small square table in the middle, an old second-hand wardrobe and a sink in the corner.
Do you remember what it cost?
No, not at all. We had a grant. My grant was £300 a year from Staffordshire County Council. That paid for everything. Beer was 11 pence, 11 old pence, which is just under a shilling.
Was it 11p a pint? I don't remember it being that cheap. It was about 2 bob. Oh, hold on. We're talking old money, new money. No, he's right.
It cost 1 6 to go to the ice skating rink, have a cup of soup, borrow some skates and skate for an hour, so that was pretty cheap.
I think now, how lucky we were. Everybody would go along on the second day of term to the bursar and get a grant, which was sufficient for everything.
One of the things that happens when students start being given money to go to university is that they actually might have more money as a student than they did at home, and they might have more money than their family does.
In 1966, the grant system had been in place for 4 years, meaning that particularly for working class students, life at university was a financial step up. Robin Pittman was one of the first undergraduates at Kent.
So these rooms are tiny.
I thought they were luxurious.
Well, do you share a room when you're at home?
I did. I shared a room with my brother, but I think for most of us this was real luxury. For me, it was the ultimate in social mobility. There were clearly people from all sorts of different classes, but it was such an intimate and hothouse atmosphere. We were forced one way and another to mix with each other. I think we saw ourselves on the forefront of change.
At Kent, most students studied, slept and had meals on campus. But what did they eat?
I can't remember ever cooking for myself. You know, if you weren't eating in college, then you survived, quite happily. I suppose on fish and chips and all the usual things.
We all remember the pie shop. You get meat pies or you get fruit pies. Every day we get pies. It's when we weren't as big as a house.
I can't remember anything about food except fish and chips on Fridays. But it is obviously OK, but certainly not exotic.
So this refectory is where you ate every day when you were here, yes?
We had breakfast in here, lunch in here, and there was formal dinners.
Sort of describe it. What was the food like?
We were treated really well, like toffs. The education was a quality education. These buildings were quality buildings. It was all quality stuff.
I wouldn't begrudge anybody the right to a university education now. I hope as many do it as can benefit from it, and it does them good. But going to university now is not the same as going to university in the 1960s.
The workload was incredible, but we did it. I think students were tougher then. For one, because you were lucky to get into university. There was so much more selection.
You look around all the students today, how different do you think your experience was from theirs?
There were 500 of us in the first year. I think there's something of the order of 20,000 students on this campus now. We went to a place where everything was new. There was no precedent. We didn't know what the courses were like. There were no previous exam papers. Everything we did was new. It was a real pioneer experience.
Very different.
I think it's much, much harder for people today. I don't think anybody left university who wanted a job who didn't find one. I think the only anxiety was finding a job that you wanted to do. But I think most people found their niche.
You might not get the job that you ideally wanted, but the idea that you wouldn't get a job at all was inconceivable. It was much less precarious and pressured than the sort of life that students have today.
I wanted to discover whether the people who went to these new campus universities of Kent and Sussex felt that in 1966 they really were part of a moment of change. And of course, because they were inside it, they didn't. But as you draw back from the year, you realise that sandwiched between the turbulence of the war and then the fear of the nuclear threat, and then the political activism of '68 and into the fragmentation of the '70s, 1966 actually sits as an expression of the change that was about to happen. Whether it was the Labour landslide, whether it was in the class mix in these universities, whether it was in the food that people ate, or even the height above the knee of the skirts that they wore. 1966 was an absolute moment of inflection and ushered in a profound change in Britain and in the South East.
I think one of my colleagues called it your amorous dalliance.
Well, it's gone on a while for a dalliance, hasn't it?
Yes, 50 years.
Next month, the BBC is staging a special event to recreate England's World Cup victory at Wembley, 50 years to the day. Tune in to your BBC local radio station tomorrow to find out how you could be there.
On the 50th anniversary of 1966, I want to explore that extraordinary year of contrasts. It was an era of technological advancement. Space travel was in its infancy, and people had more cash in their pockets. But at the same time, TV was still black and white, and deliveries could still be unmotorised. In the southeast, two new universities, Kent and Sussex, were at the forefront of this revolution in higher education. They promised both men and women from every walk of life all the opportunities a university degree could offer.
So what I want to know is how much did the people who first came to those two universities feel that it was an important moment of change?
I'm going to visit both universities to try and find out. Kent admitted its first 500 students in 1965.
Where people come together in different ways. And these campuses are designed to bring people together in different ways.
I was certainly the only person from Northern Ireland. I did discover eventually some other Scottish person who played his bagpipes after dinner every night and drove everybody spare.
Everything was changing. Music, art, fashion, society. And you didn't want to do anything that was old. You didn't want to go to an institution which was, decades old, dated from the last century. And you certainly didn't want to go to something that had been around for centuries.
Talk a bit about where the 60s had landed by 1966.
Well, the lovely thing about 66 was there's this feeling that that period of anxiety about World War, about atomic war, nuclear wars, by 66, that was beginning to be in the past. By then, Harold Wilson's notion of a new scientific revolution, really, a new kind of society that we were creating, was beginning to make a real impact on the way Sussex thought about itself. You know, we were doing something creative to create a new Britain.
1966 was the year that Britain's post-war children came of age, and it changed everything.
The look, the culture, the music. There was something about 1966.
It was very easy for people to get into bed together.
It was a revelation. I was entering another planet.
Universities were at the heart of this transformation. In the first half of the decade, 15 new ones were created, 8 in 1966 alone.
We were doing something creative to create a new Britain.
For me, it was the ultimate in social mobility.
They would change this country forever.
There was equality between men and women.
It gave us all an extraordinary foundation.
It was actually the fulcrum of all that change, and that's what made it so exciting.
Sussex had opened 4 years earlier, and I studied law there in the 70s, so please excuse the tie. Young, pioneering academics were tempted away from the more traditional institutions to join them. One of them was Rod Kedwood.
What one remembers about that era is, for all its radicalism, actually still a tiny number of people were going to university.
Yeah.
So do you remember it as being actually very middle class still?
We opened the university to people who had no qualifications. We were the first university to do that. And we admitted a lot of adult students on that basis. So we were intent on breaking down the barriers.
I was the first member of my family to go to university. People, I'm sure, who might not have been naturally thrown together with other people were thrown together. I think it was a very positive thing.
I think there is something special about a 60s campus.
And this new Britain found a new political direction when Harold Wilson's Labour Party won a landslide victory in March 1966.
This is a massive win for Labour, the biggest single change of seats since their great victory of 1945. And of course, it's a massive personal win for Mr. Wilson.
In the period between 1965 and 67, homosexuality was decriminalised, abortion was legalised, and the Race Relations Act was passed. And Wilson's thrust was on what he called the white heat of technology. So there was serious money to invest in these new universities.
How much did you have a sense that this was the turning point of putting the war behind you?
Well, I think it was almost everybody's parental generation. All their parents had been thoroughly involved in the war. We had a debt of gratitude to pay, and we were very conscious of wanting to build on what they had done. And having a new university, having a new society, having a new concept of what education and science and politics was